It started like any other week in the quiet cul-de-sac of Briarwood, the kind of neighborhood where the hum of sprinklers and the occasional bark of a dog formed the background soundtrack of suburban life. But that Monday morning, I found an envelope in the mail that made my chest tighten, a $900 citation from our homeowners association, stamped with immediate attention required. My stomach sank. Could a single notice really upend our week, our plans, and our standing in the neighborhood before the Thursday board review? I had a creeping sense that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch across days, testing patience, pride, and, ultimately, strategy. The association had always been meticulous about rules, but this felt different. This wasn't a polite reminder, it was a targeted strike. As I examined the notice, I realized it cited a minor change I'd made to our backyard fence, a fence I had lowered slightly to improve our view of the garden and let in more sunlight. It seemed trivial, even considerate. Yet, according to the letter, this adjustment was a violation of a specific height regulation enforced by one particular board member known throughout Briarwood for her relentless attention to detail. Her reputation preceded her. Neighbors whispered about the strict board member, Mrs. K, and her penchant for aggressive compliance. She didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them, wielding bylaws and amendments with a precision that could make even the most patient resident nervous. Stories of late-night notices, sudden inspections, and escalating fines filled the neighborhood chatter, and now, I was the latest subject in her campaign. It wasn't just about the fence. This was about control, boundaries, and, surprisingly, ego. The association's rulebook, particularly Bylaw 4.3, stipulated exact height limits for perimeter fences, including specifications on materials and placement. I had reviewed it before making the change, confident I was within reasonable limits. Yet here I was, staring at a formal notice demanding immediate correction and a $900 fine. The letter even referenced a previous, final notice dated May 12th for another minor infraction, a friendly warning I had assumed was routine. That envelope now felt like a prelude to a much more serious confrontation. I spent that morning pacing my backyard, measuring the fence again, tape in hand, comparing it against the official drawings of our lot. The angle of the sun illuminated each plank differently, casting shadows that exaggerated even the smallest deviations. Was this really a violation? Or was it a personal vendetta disguised as neighborhood governance? The distinction would matter when facing the board later in the week. Over the next couple of hours, I began cataloging every piece of evidence that might support my position. Photographs of the fence before and after the adjustment, timestamps from my phone, copies of correspondence with neighbors who had approved of the slight change, and even references from the board agenda excerpt that had previously discussed flexible fence adjustments. All of it became critical. Each photo was a potential shield, each note a tool in a battle I hadn't anticipated but was now forced to fight. Tensions rose quickly. The neighbors, usually friendly, began to watch curiously. Petty rumors surfaced. "Did you see the notice for the Smith's fence?" Murmurs floated along the sidewalk. The quiet hum of the sprinklers now felt like a ticking clock, counting down to our Thursday board review. My anxiety was compounded by the sound of leaves rustling against the fence in the wind, a subtle reminder that everything could be scrutinized at any moment. I knew I couldn't respond impulsively. This was a delicate dance. Any misstep could trigger a cascade of additional fines, not to mention social friction in a neighborhood where appearances mattered. My plan needed to be precise, leveraging the little-known flexibility allowed under Bylaw 4.3. That clause, buried deep within the HOA's official documents, hinted at allowances for adjustments under specific circumstances. It was a thread I intended to follow, carefully, without provoking unnecessary escalation. The question lingered, could a simple recalibration of a backyard fence really expose a family to $900 in fines, social scrutiny, and a tense board review? All before Thursday? The stakes were higher than they appeared, and the potential for a dramatic reversal was real. I had to act strategically, or risk becoming a cautionary tale whispered across Briarwood. By mid-afternoon, I realized that this wasn't just a personal issue. It was an unfolding HOA nightmare, one that spoke to the broader dynamics of power, compliance, and petty control. Mrs. K's reputation for escalating minor infractions meant that ignoring the notice wasn't an option. It also meant that careful documentation, calm reasoning, and a methodical approach were the only paths to avoiding a complete disaster. The first evidence prop I pulled together was the final notice dated May 12th, which, though minor, demonstrated my history of compliance. Photographs captured the exact measurements of the fence before the alteration, showing how minor the change truly was. Notes from a neighbor who had casually remarked on the improvement in sunlight became surprisingly significant. Each piece of evidence was small, almost trivial, yet collectively they formed a narrative that could counter the board's punitive stance. By the evening, I had drafted a preliminary plan. It included clear photographic evidence, references to Bylaw 4.3, and a timeline of interactions with the HOA. I also prepared a polite yet assertive letter outlining our compliance with the rulebook, anticipating the inevitable scrutiny during the Thursday board review. The house was quiet now, save for the distant hum of cars passing through the cul-de-sac, each one a reminder that the neighborhood was always watching. It was at this point I realized something critical. This wasn't merely about avoiding a fine. It was about setting a precedent, defending personal autonomy in the face of bureaucratic overreach, and navigating the social complexities of a neighborhood governed by both rules and reputations. The $900 citation was a spark, but the fire it could ignite was social, legal, and deeply personal. The first 2 days passed with minor communications, emails confirming receipt of the notice, polite acknowledgments from the association, and quiet murmurs from neighbors. Each message carried subtle undertones, hints that the board was watching closely, that Mrs. K was invested in the outcome, and that any misstep could escalate matters quickly. Every interaction became a strategic consideration, a chess move in an unexpected HOA showdown. I also revisited the HOA's official documents late that night, scanning for precedents and nuances. References to fence adjustments under exceptional circumstances and clauses buried in dense legalese offered hope. Could these provisions be leveraged to avoid the fine? Could the board's strict enforcer be shown that the change was reasonable, compliant, and even beneficial to the community aesthetic? I hoped so, but it would require careful planning and impeccable presentation. Neighbors began to take sides, albeit quietly. Some were sympathetic, recalling their own minor run-ins with the board. Others seemed eager for gossip, their whispers a reminder that social reputation in Briarwood mattered just as much as compliance with rules. I felt the pressure mounting, the weight of expectation pressing down as Thursday approached. By now, I knew that the fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was the center of a brewing neighborhood drama, a test of patience, strategy, and the subtle art of HOA negotiation. A single misstep could multiply fines, strain relationships, and potentially turn our lives into the next Neighbors from Hell story circulating online. The challenge was clear: navigate the rules carefully, document meticulously, and prepare for a confrontation that might redefine our week. The morning after organizing all my evidence, I could feel the tension creeping into every corner of the house. The fence, once a simple structure meant to mark boundaries, had become a symbol of confrontation. I paced back and forth in the backyard, tape measure in hand, checking the alignment one more time. Light shifted across the panels, highlighting a slight curve that, under Mrs. K's scrutiny, could be spun into a violation. I reminded myself, every inch mattered, every angle counted, and my response had to be flawless. Neighbors began making subtle comments. One of the older residents casually remarked on my creative landscaping, but the undertone was unmistakable. Gossip traveled fast in a cul-de-sac, and everyone seemed to sense that a spectacle was brewing. Even the hum of the morning traffic felt amplified, a soundtrack to the anxiety that now dominated our home. This wasn't just a personal issue. It had grown into a neighborhood concern, a microcosm of HOA versus homeowner tension, with Mrs. K at the epicenter. By mid-morning, I received another note slipped under the gate, this one marked with bold letters and the HOA seal. It reiterated the $900 fine and added a new wrinkle: Any appeal had to be formally submitted in writing before the upcoming Thursday meeting.
A deadline.
Suddenly, the abstract anxiety transformed into a tangible countdown. Failure to comply, or even a misstep in the documentation, would mean immediate escalation. My heart raced as I reread the letter, absorbing every word, every nuance of implied threat. I realized the importance of leveraging bylaw 4.3 carefully. It allowed minor deviations from fence height for certain aesthetic or safety reasons, but the language was intentionally obscure, likely designed to give the board flexibility, or, in this case, leverage over residents. I began drafting a compliance plan that would respect the letter of the law while subtly challenging the board's heavy-handed interpretation. Evidence was my ally, logic my shield, and strategy my weapon. The first piece of my approach was clear: photographic documentation. I created a visual timeline of the fence's alterations, each image timestamped, capturing shadows and light angles that illustrated the subtlety of the change. I noted measurements meticulously, comparing them against the official lot map. This alone would not suffice, but it formed a foundation, a preemptive counter to any claim that I had ignored the rules. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A $900 fine was substantial, yes, but the broader implications, the social scrutiny, the reputation within the HOA, the precedent set for future disputes, loomed even larger. Each photo, each note, each reference to prior compliance became a line in my strategic defense. And with Mrs. K's known insistence on perfection, I knew she would scrutinize every detail, seeking any possible fault to amplify the situation. By late morning, I reached out discreetly to a few neighbors for insight. One mentioned how their own small fence adjustment had been scrutinized for weeks, ultimately resolved only after presenting similar evidence to the board. Another shared the story of a $500 fine overturned due to a minor technicality buried in the HOA's rulebook. Each anecdote reinforced the reality. Preparation and documentation were crucial, and even small oversights could lead to exponential consequences. As Thursday loomed closer, the situation escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Another note arrived, this time detailing additional requirements, immediate remeasurements, a formal report to the board, and a demand for explanation regarding the fence's impact on community aesthetics. The language was formal, precise, and intimidating, leaving no ambiguity that the association intended to enforce compliance stringently. It felt like a calculated move, an attempt to test resolve. I methodically reviewed each requirement. Using the photographs, prior approvals, and bylaw 4.3 references, I drafted a formal response. Each paragraph was carefully worded, emphasizing compliance, minor adjustment, and community benefit. I highlighted the visual improvements brought by the lowered fence, noting how sunlight now reached areas previously shadowed. This wasn't just a fence, it was a subtle argument for reasonable flexibility within HOA rules. Tension spiked when I realized the board could reject any reasoning they didn't like, yet the careful inclusion of precedent, documented approval, and photographic evidence gave me leverage. The situation was no longer just a $900 fine. It had become a delicate chess game, a HOA revenge story in the making. Each move had to be strategic, each step measured. I understood that any miscalculation could result in fines compounding or social friction escalating. I also noted the social dynamics. Neighbors observing the back and forth, some curious, some judgmental. This added pressure, creating an atmosphere where every action and inaction mattered. Every moment, from reviewing documents to taking photos, felt like a rehearsal for the main confrontation at the board review. The stakes were high, and the narrative tension was palpable, like a Karen-neighbor drama unfolding quietly but intensely across the cul-de-sac. At this point, the groundwork was complete. All photographic evidence compiled, bylaw 4.3 meticulously cited, and a preliminary strategy crafted to navigate the association's scrutiny. The $900 citation was not merely a financial burden, but a fulcrum for potential escalation. Preparation and careful planning were essential to withstand the board's pressure, while subtly asserting homeowner autonomy. Late Wednesday evening, I began considering proactive measures, thinking beyond mere compliance. There were subtle maneuvers I could employ to demonstrate good faith, while hinting at alternative interpretations of the bylaw. I mapped out minor adjustments, noting where slight reconfigurations of the fence could further reinforce compliance without sacrificing the aesthetic improvements we valued. I also reviewed the board's recent meeting minutes, uncovering small references to past leniency for similar situations. These historical breadcrumbs became a tactical advantage, offering potential leverage during the Thursday review. Each detail strengthened my confidence that a carefully planned response could avert the fine or, at the very least, provide a platform for respectful negotiation. Meanwhile, I documented the timeline meticulously, logging every communication, note, and observation. The process became ritualistic: photograph, measure, timestamp, file. Each action was part of a broader narrative I was constructing, a narrative of conscientious compliance, reasonable deviation, and subtle assertion of homeowner rights within the HOA framework. The atmosphere was tense. Evening light filtered across the fence panels, casting long shadows that seemed to exaggerate every angle. Each moment reinforced the reality that the confrontation was imminent and unavoidable. My preparation had to be comprehensive, anticipating both procedural challenges and interpersonal dynamics, particularly from Mrs. K, whose scrutiny and insistence on enforcement had become legendary. By Wednesday night, the scenario was clear. A carefully executed compliance maneuver could prevent the $900 fine and possibly expose the board's overreach. The stakes included money, reputation, and social standing within the cul-de-sac. One misstep could lead to additional scrutiny, gossip, and further fines. Yet, the opportunity for a strategic reversal, a satisfying assertion of homeowner agency, was within reach. It was a tense, suspenseful moment, a real-life HOA versus homeowner chess match unfolding in our backyard. Thursday morning arrived with an unusual stillness. The neighborhood, usually vibrant with the hum of life, seemed to hold its breath. The $900 citation loomed like a shadow over our week, but I was ready. My documentation was organized, my evidence props meticulously prepared, and my argument grounded firmly in Bylaw 4.3. I had rehearsed the presentation in my mind countless times, considering every possible objection, anticipating every scrutinizing glance from Mrs. K or any board member inclined towards strict enforcement. I started by reviewing each photograph once more. Sunlight illuminated the fence at the perfect angle to highlight how minor the adjustment truly was. Each measurement aligned with the HOA specifications and historical references, including the final notice dated May 12th, provided context for prior compliance. My plan was subtle yet strategic: show absolute compliance while gently questioning the board's interpretation, making it clear that the $900 fine was disproportionate. As I stepped into the boardroom that afternoon, the atmosphere was tense. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights added to the sterile, almost clinical environment. Mrs. K sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her gaze sharp. It was clear she had anticipated some resistance, yet she had no idea just how prepared I was. I presented my documentation methodically. Photographs, measurements, and references to Bylaw 4.3 formed a visual narrative that emphasized compliance. I pointed out the minor aesthetic benefits of the lowered fence, highlighting how sunlight reached neglected areas of the backyard, improving overall community appearance. The board members murmured among themselves, flipping through copies of the evidence I had submitted in advance. Each page, each image, was a calculated step in my HOA revenge story, a subtle pushback against overreach without provoking direct confrontation. The tension reached a peak when I proposed a compromise: slight adjustments to satisfy the letter of the law while maintaining the fence's improved aesthetic function. The offer was precise, reasonable, and backed by documented precedent from past board decisions. This was a turning point, the chance to transform a punitive scenario into a display of careful strategy and calm assertiveness. The room went quiet, the soft hum of air conditioning filling the space as Mrs. K considered the proposal. Some board members seemed impressed by the thoroughness of my preparation. Their nods were almost imperceptible, but to me, they signaled that my careful attention to detail and strategic use of Bylaw 4.3 had shifted the balance. The $900 fine, once looming as an unavoidable threat, now seemed negotiable, contingent upon minor compliance adjustments rather than punitive action. The climax unfolded subtly, but satisfyingly. After a prolonged pause, the board agreed to accept the evidence and allow minor adjustments rather than enforcing the full fine. Mrs. K's gaze softened fractionally, an acknowledgement that meticulous preparation and strategic presentation could counter even her infamous enforcement tendencies. It was a satisfying reversal, a quiet victory that affirmed the importance of preparation, patience, and careful navigation of HOA dynamics. I left the boardroom with a mix of relief and quiet triumph. The $900 citation had been neutralized, replaced by a manageable and reasonable solution. It was not a public spectacle, it was a strategic victory executed with precision, showcasing how knowledge, planning, and calm assertiveness could transform a tense HOA nightmare into a testament to careful homeowner advocacy. Back at home, the tension finally lifted. I walked the backyard, tape measure in hand one last time, appreciating how the fence harmonized with the sunlight and landscape. The minor adjustments required were trivial compared to the initial threat, yet the experience left an indelible mark. I had navigated bureaucracy, social scrutiny, and petty enforcement with strategy and patience, transforming a potential disaster into a story of measured triumph. The neighbors, once whispering in anticipation of drama, began to nod in quiet acknowledgement as they passed by. Some offered subtle congratulations, while others simply observed in silence, realizing that this HOA encounter had been more complex than it appeared at first glance. The culmination was a blend of relief, satisfaction, and subtle vindication, an ordinary fence becoming the centerpiece of a carefully orchestrated HOA revenge story. In the aftermath, I reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of meticulous preparation, strategic documentation, and understanding the subtle leverage points within HOA regulations. The $900 citation had been more than a financial concern. It had been a test of patience, planning, and poise under pressure. While the fence remained, minor adjustments were implemented seamlessly, and the neighborhood's tension eased gradually. It was closure, subtle but complete, leaving space for reflection on boundaries, power, and community dynamics. Tell me your HOA horror in one line. What rule did you clash with, and what was the outcome? As for what comes next, Briarwood never rests for long. While the fence dispute concluded, whispers of another board-enforced regulation have already started circulating. A safety lighting rule threatens to turn another minor modification into a neighborhood spectacle, and you can bet the drama is just beginning.